In the constantly evolving landscape of modern horror cinema, few films manage to strike the delicate balance between terror and emotional depth. The Black Phone, directed by Scott Derrickson, does exactly that, creating an unforgettable viewing experience that surpasses the Joe Hill short story on which it is based. Released 3 years ago in 2021, this film has garnered critical acclaim for its chilling atmosphere, nuanced performances, and thoughtful expansion of the source material. While Hill's short story provides the bare bones of a terrifying premise, Derrickson's adaptation infuses it with layers of character development, thematic richness, and an immersive visual style that elevates the narrative beyond mere survival horror. For fans of both horror literature and film, The Black Phone is a masterclass in how to take a short story and expand it into a feature-length film that not only enhances the original, but also surpasses it in nearly every aspect. When comparing Joe Hill's short story to Scott Derrickson's film adaptation, it becomes clear early on that the film takes the skeletal framework of Hill's narrative and expands upon it in meaningful ways. The short story, while taut and effective, operates within the confines of a brief singular focus. A boy named Finney is kidnapped by a sinister figure known as the Grabber, and he must find a way to escape from a basement using a disconnected phone that mysteriously rings with the voices of the Grabber's previous victims. It's a premise ripe with potential, and in Hill's hands, it works well as a tense, quick read. However, its brevity means that in many aspects, such as the characters' emotional depth, their backstories, and the town in which these horrifying events unfold, remains quite underdeveloped. Derrickson's film wisely takes this foundation and builds upon it, transforming what was once a simple story of survival into a broader, more intricate narrative that explores the emotional and psychological impacts of trauma. Where Hill's short story gives us only a glimpse into Finney's life before his abduction, the film dedicates significant screen time to fleshing out his relationships and struggles. We see Finney as a victim of bullying at school, a quiet and reserved child struggling to find his place in a hostile environment. His home life is similarly fraught, with an abusive, rather alcoholic father who looms large over both Finney and his younger sister Gwen. By giving us these glimpses into Finney's life, the film creates a deeper emotional investment in his character, making his subsequent kidnapping feel all the more tragic and terrifying. In addition to expanding the protagonist's backstory, the film also takes the time to explore the world around him. The small town setting of The Black Phone feels lived in, with a palpable sense of unease hanging over every scene. Derrickson doesn't just focus on the events within the Grabber's basement, but instead paints a broader picture of a town haunted by disappearances, a community slowly unraveling under the weight of its losses. This expansion of the narrative gives the film a greater sense of scale, adding layers of tension that simply aren't present in the short story. The Grabber's reign of terror isn't just a singular event, it is a part of a larger pattern, one that has affected countless lives, making Finney's plight feel like a piece of a much larger, much darker puzzle. Another key area where the film builds upon the short story's foundation is in its treatment of the supernatural elements. In Hill's version, the disconnected phone serves as the primary supernatural device, allowing Finney to communicate with the previous victims of the Grabber. This element remains in the film, but Derrickson takes it a step further by adding new layers to the phone's significance. Rather than being merely a tool for escape, the phone becomes a symbol of Finney's journey towards self-reliance and inner strength. Each call he receives from the dead is not just a clue towards his escape, but also a lesson in courage and resilience. The supernatural part of the film is thus not just a plot device, but a metaphor for Finney's growth, something that Hill's short story only hints at, but never fully explores to its entire potential. In The Black Phone, Finney's characterization is a central pillar of the story, and the film's extended runtime allows for a deeper, more nuanced exploration of his character than the short story could ever provide. In Joe Hill's original version, Finney is a somewhat passive character, reacting to the horrors around him, but not fully engaging with them in a way that allows for significant growth. The short story's length and focus limit how much we learn about him beyond his fear and desire to escape, which, while effective for the format, leaves the character feeling somewhat underdeveloped. By contrast, the film transforms Finney into a fully realized character whose emotional journey is just as important as his physical struggle to survive. The film presents Finney as a quiet, introspective boy who is grappling with feelings of inadequacy long before he encounters the Grabber. He is bullied at school, unable to defend himself, and often relies on his younger sister Gwen to do the protecting. His home life offers no respite, whereas he and Gwen live under the oppressive rule of their father, a man broken by grief and strong alcoholism. This portrayal of Finney as a boy already trapped in a world of fear fear and helplessness adds a layer of emotional complexity to the story that the short story lacks. His kidnapping, then, becomes not just a physical ordeal, but also an extension of the emotional confinement he has experienced throughout his short life. The beauty of this deeper characterization is that it allows for real growth over the course of this film's short but meaningful runtime. As Finney is forced to confront the horrors of the grabber's basement, he also confronts his own internal struggles. His fear of standing up for himself, his feelings of powerlessness, and his longing for autonomy. Each interaction with the voices on the black phone becomes a stepping stone in Finney's journey towards self-empowerment. By the time he finally takes control and fights back against the grabber, the victory feels earned, not just because he survives, but because he is transformed into someone stronger and more resilient than the boy we met at the beginning of the film. This character arc, which is largely absent from the short story, is one of this film's greatest strengths. Furthermore, the film's portrayal of Finney taps into a universal fear that many viewers can relate to, the fear of not being able to protect oneself or the people we deeply care about. His struggle against the grabber is not just a fight for survival, but a fight to reclaim his sense of agency in a world that has repeatedly stripped it away from him. This makes Finney a more relatable and sympathetic protagonist than his counterpart within the short story, who, while likable, lacks the same level of emotional depth and relatability. The film's decision to spend time developing Finney's character pays off in spades, as it elevates the narrative from a simple tale of survival to a story about personal growth and empowerment. Additionally, Mason Thames's portrayal of Finney in the film is pitch perfect. His performance adds another layer to Finney's relatability, making the audience root for him not just because he's in danger, but because they've come to care about him as a person. By bringing Finney to life in a way that feels authentic and emotionally resonant, the film makes his journey all the more impactful. Finney is not just a victim, he is a character we as the audience grow to admire, and this triumph over the grabber is as much of a victory of spirit as it is a physical escape. One of the most significant improvements the Black Phone makes over its source material is in its portrayal of the grabber, the film's terrifying antagonist. In Joe Hill's short story, the grabber is a menacing figure, but somewhat undefined, a shadowy kidnapper whose motives and background remain largely unexplored. This works well within the context of the short story, where the focus is on Finney's escape, rather than on understanding the man who captured him. However, for a full-length film, the character needed to be more than just a faceless villain, he needed to become a fully realized embodiment of fear and psychological horror. Scott Derrickson's version of the grabber does exactly that, transforming him into one of the most disturbing and memorable antagonists in recent memory. Ethan Hawke's portrayal of the grabber is nothing short of chilling. From the moment he first appears on screen, clad in a twisted mask and exuding a sickening sense of sadistic pleasure, the grabber commands attention. Hawke's performance is subtle, filled with disturbing quirks and mannerisms that make the character feel unpredictable and genuinely dangerous. Unlike the more one-dimensional villain in Hill's short story, the film's grabber is a complex character whose cruelty is interwoven with an unsettling psychological depth. His penchant for playing mind games with his victims, combined with his eerie calmness, creates a sense of dread that permeates every scene in which he appears. What makes the film's grabber even more terrifying is the way he is framed, not just as a physical threat, but as a psychological predator. The mask he wears throughout the film, a key addition not present in the short story, serves as a metaphor for his fractured identity. The mask, which changes expressions and sometimes only reveals parts of his face, gives the grabber an unsettling duality. On one hand, it dehumanizes him, turning him into a faceless monster who could be anyone lurking in the shadows. On the other hand, it suggests that the grabber is hiding more than just his face. He is hiding from himself, from his own guilt or shame, or perhaps from a deeper, more twisted part of his psyche. This layering of psychological complexity is one of the ways the film elevates the grabber beyond the typical horror villain archetype that is portrayed somewhat in the short story. One of the most striking aspects of the Black Phone is its ability to create and sustain an atmosphere of unrelenting dread, a feat that the short story, while effective, cannot fully replicate due to the limitations of its format. Joe Hill's short story, by necessity, operates at a brisk pace, focusing on Finney's capture and subsequent escape, without lingering too much on the world outside the basement. This works for the story's condensed format, but the film, with its extended runtime, is able to immerse the audience in a way that feels not just dangerous, but deeply unsettling. Derrickson's brilliant direction, combined with a haunting score, brilliant acting, and a carefully created visual style, transforms the Black Phone into an experience that is much about atmosphere as it is about plot. The film opens with a sense of foreboding that only intensifies as the story progresses. Derrickson wisely chooses to set this film in the 70s, a decision that adds a layer of nostalgic unease to the proceedings. The time period, with its lack of modern technology, creates a sense of isolation that amplifies the terror. The absence of cell phones, security cameras, and other modern safety nets allows the story to unfold in a way that feels both timeless and terrifyingly plausible. It taps into a primal fear, the fear of being cut off from help, or being completely at the mercy of a predator with no way to call for help. In addition to the time period, the film's setting, which is that of a drab, run-down suburban neighborhood, serves as the perfect backdrop for the horrors that unfold. Derrickson and his team create a world that feels both familiar and alien, a place where the ordinary can quickly turn sinister. The Grabber's house in particular becomes a character in its own right, its dilapidated appearance and shadowy interiors adding to the sense of claustrophobia and despair. The basement where Finney is held is a masterclass in minimalist horror design, with its stark concrete walls and dim lighting creating a sense of inescapable doom. The lack of ornate set pieces allow the audience to focus on the terror of the situation itself, the suffocating isolation, the feeling of being watched, and the ever-present threat of violence. In the end, The Black Phone stands as a brilliant modern horror film that not only builds upon its source material, but transcends it in almost every conceivable way. And while Joe Hill's short story is an effective, chilling tale of survival, the film expands its narrative, its characters, and emotional depth to create a more immersive, terrifying, and ultimately more satisfying experience. By developing Finney's character into a resilient and relatable protagonist, and by turning the Grabber into a psychologically complex and deeply disturbing villain, the film elevates the story beyond the constraints of the short form. And what sets The Black Phone apart from other horror films, and from the short story it is based on, is its ability to create an atmosphere that is as much psychological as it is supernatural. Derrickson's direction, combined with Ethan Hawke's chilling and brilliant performance, the haunting sound design, and the impressive, dread-filled atmosphere and town that this film takes place in, makes this film a slow-burn thriller that grips the audience from the first scene and doesn't let go until the credits roll. The film's exploration of themes like fear, isolation, and the fight for survival gives it a weight and emotional resonance that lingers long after the horror fades. Ultimately, for viewers who appreciate Hill's story, or just a deeply interesting and brilliantly made horror movie, The Black Phone offers a more nuanced and gripping experience, proving that sometimes the cinematic medium can elevate a story to all new kinds of heights. By deepening the emotional core of its characters, amplifying the tension through atmosphere and sound, and creating a more layered villain in the Grabber, The Black Phone leaves a lasting impression as a horror film that succeeds where so many others fall short. It is a modern horror classic that captures the essence of fear and survival while delivering a more engaging and complete narrative than its literary predecessor.
Oh, check on my love.